In 2015, a newspaper story brought down a $9 billion company. That's the version everyone knows. It's off by 2 years. Theranos didn't die when the truth came out. It died in September 2013 at a Walgreens in Palo Alto, the day the first real patient's blood went into a machine that didn't work. Everything after that was borrowed time, bought with other people's credibility, and the bill went to the patients. Every fraud runs on the same clock. It dies the moment new money can't cover the old. This one didn't borrow money first. It borrowed something better, validation, the company that sold a future it couldn't build. The promise was beautiful. 1 drop of blood from a fingertip, 200 tests, a machine called Edison. The pitch raised $945 million over the company's lifetime. Here is what a jury later heard. Of roughly 300 tests the company developed, the Edison ever ran 12. The next generation device, the Minilab, never touched a patient sample, not once. The rest, the actual tests on actual patients, ran on ordinary commercial machines made by other companies, some of them secretly modified to take the tiny samples. In her own trial testimony, Holmes acknowledged the company used modified Siemens analyzers. And there was a reason they couldn't just use a single drop. To run a fingertip sample on machines built for a full vial, you have to dilute it. And diluting a small sample multiplies the error in the result. The company's own lab director, brought in near the end, reviewed the data and concluded the Edison was, quote, not performing from the very beginning, and that every result it had reported carried a possible risk to the patient. When VIP investors visited, prosecutors showed the Edison on the table ran a null protocol, a demo that did nothing, while the real sample was quietly tested elsewhere. So how does a machine that never worked survive 12 years as a company and run on real patients for 2 of them? You rent credibility from people who can't test it. Start with the board, 2 former secretaries of state, 2 former senators, a future defense secretary, generals, admirals, CEOs, a collection of the most decorated names in America, and among them not one expert in laboratory science. They weren't free. James Mattis testified he was paid $150,000 a year. Before he joined, while still a serving general, he'd pushed the Army to fast-track the device, writing, "We're kicking this into overdrive." Within hours of a regulator flagging that it wasn't FDA compliant, Mattis forwarded the concern, asking, quote, "How do we overcome this new obstacle?" The borrowed names brought borrowed money. A $9 billion valuation in 2014, magazine covers, $150 million from the Walton family, $125 from Rupert Murdoch, $100 million from the DeVos family, wired in a single transaction that would later become a count on a federal indictment. And when investors asked about traction, they heard the technology was deployed by the military, on battlefields, on medevac helicopters, earning over $100 million in revenue. The real number for 2014 the SEC found, a little over 100,000. The battlefield deployments, 0. Borrowed time isn't free. Someone pays the interest. Patients paid first. At trial, a woman testified a Theranos result flagged her for HIV. A later test cleared her. Another patient was told her pregnancy was failing. It wasn't, and she later delivered a healthy child after the false result had already changed her medication. A doctor described his patient, a healthy dentist whose prostate cancer marker swung from 26 to 1.7 to 22 across 3 tests of the same body. Inside the company, a chemist named Ian Gibbons, the first real scientist Holmes ever hired, was summoned to testify in a lawsuit that threatened the patents. The night before his deposition, he took an overdose. He died a week later. According to his widow, the company's response was a call asking for his confidential files back. A 20-something lab worker named Tyler Schultz, grandson of the board's most famous member, reported the company to New York health authorities under a fake name. Theranos lawyers ambushed him at his own grandfather's house. His parents spent $400,000 defending him. A colleague, Erica Chung, had watched failing quality control data simply get deleted. She wrote a letter to federal regulators. That letter worked. 3 days after it arrived, inspectors walked into the lab unannounced. Their finding, in the government's own words, immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. And in October 2015, the story everyone remembers finally ran. Hot startup Theranos has struggled with its blood test technology. The reporter was John Carreru. The clock had already been running on real patients for 2 years. He just read it out loud. Then it all unwound in order. The lab's license revoked. The board of statesmen, quietly renamed counselors, then dissolved. The SEC, fraud charges, settled for $500,000 and a 10-year ban. And in 2022, a jury convicted Elizabeth Holmes of defrauding investors on 4 counts $140 million worth. But here is the verdict almost nobody talks about. On every count involving patients, the people whose blood was actually tested, the jury found her not guilty. One juror later explained, she was, quote, one step removed from them. The investors heard her pitch, the patients only met the machine. Her partner, Sunny Balwani, who ran the lab day to day, was tried separately and convicted on all 12 counts, patients included. The man who oversaw the machines was held responsible for them. The woman who sold the dream was not. The closer you stood to the actual blood, the more the law could touch you. The sentence was 11 years, recently reduced to 10. The restitution order, $452 million, upheld on appeal. Here is what's actually being collected, according to court filings: $25 a quarter. Her reported net worth, $0. The $452 million will almost certainly never be paid. What the patients actually got back came from other pockets. Arizona's Attorney General forced Theranos to refund every blood test sold in the state, $4.65 million, in full, and the pharmacy that hosted the machines settled for $44 million more, a small base payment, double the cost of their tests, and several hundred extra for those who'd actually been stuck with a needle. Theranos never had a product. What it had was a clock and an extraordinary talent for winding it, borrowed names, borrowed money, borrowed proof. The machine never worked, and that was knowable the whole time by anyone who got to look inside. Fake it till you make it doesn't work in healthcare. Next, the payments giant whose own auditors signed off on billions in cash that was never there.